p.m., so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to, this is the sixth session of our series of Youth Meets SDGs. My name is Iman, and I run Global Youth for UNICEF, so it's really nice to see you guys. We have an amazing speaker today. We're talking about foreign assistance and USAID, which is a great, absolutely amazing organization and agency in the US, and they're doing fantastic work. So I'll be doing the quick introduction, and then Mr. Groarke will have the mic, and I'll be asking him a few questions that you guys sent, as well as you'll have the opportunity to ask your questions in the chat box or the Q&A box below. This session's 1 hour long, so everything's pretty short and concise. And I guess it's just a really informational session for all of you to learn a bit about things you don't get covered in a normal school curriculum. And all of our sessions, we've had a really diverse audience, so we're looking forward to having you guys with us in this session today. While I'm giving my introduction and we begin, I'd really appreciate if you guys could type in where you're tuning in from in the chat box below. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat box. So in there, just write which country you're coming from or tuning in from, just so we can see our amazing diverse audience. And oh, awesome, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, that's great. Yeah, we have a pretty concentrated Saudi Arabia audience, which is awesome to see. All right, cool. So just a quick rundown of the schedule for today. We'll be starting off with the questions for about 45 minutes and the last 15 minutes. As you guys will have the opportunity to send in questions in the Q&A box below throughout the session, and we'll be answering those in the last 15 minutes. So yeah, without further ado, Mr. Groarke, it's so nice to have you. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I don't think I can see your camera.
Yeah, unfortunately, my camera is on, but I'm getting a blank on the screen. So I will ask our technicians to take a look. This has happened before where there's a malfunction, but according to my screen here, the camera is operating. How's that?
Awesome.
Okay, so now I'm on. There you go.
Awesome. All right, great. And one quick question before we get started. Yes, this is a certificated webinar, and all our certificates will be sent at the end of our session. All right, great. So Mr. Groarke, thank you so much for coming today. We're super excited to have you. Could you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes. Hold on 1 minute. It's come on. I'm just telling the technicians it's on. Yeah, I am a senior officer in the United States Diplomatic Service. And what I specialize in is development work. I've been with the Agency for International Development, which is an agency of the US government for the last 25 years. I've spent all 25 years living overseas. And the countries in which I have worked, Bangladesh, Senegal, Egypt, Iraq, Egypt again, Afghanistan, Morocco, Haiti, Pakistan, and now South Africa.
Awesome. So you've been all over the country, all over the world actually, in terms of working for USAID. I was doing a little bit of reading, and I saw that you had worked in not only like Haiti or Pakistan, but Morocco and Southern Africa. So that's really super cool. So my first question for you is that the United States Agency for International Development is a huge agency, but I guess a lot of teenagers might not be entirely familiar with the agency. So could you describe a little bit of maybe what type of work the group does?
The Agency for International Development is the US government agency that's responsible for delivering assistance to countries overseas. It's the largest bilateral aid agency in the world. And what I mean by bilateral is it's a government-to-government aid agency as opposed to the United Nations or the World Bank, which are considered multilateral agencies. USAID has an annual budget of about 23 billion euros and works in about 100 countries throughout the world. Much of the work that we do in the countries within which we work, public health, education, supporting economic growth, protecting the environment, helping to bring energy to those who are underserved, and providing humanitarian assistance in times of crises.
Awesome. So, as I mentioned, you have been with USAID around the world. So, could you maybe tell us a little bit about how you started with the group, how you got involved, and what led you there?
Well, since I was very young, I always wanted to have a career in public service. I always wanted to have a career that I could feel passionate about, something where I felt that I was contributing to something meaningful and not having something that's just a job, but having something that really would have a broader effect on people's lives. And I was able to find that working for the Agency for International Development.
Awesome. So within USAID, you've done a lot of projects and a lot of work. And even before that, I was reading about how you worked in Egypt and Iraq. So are there any particular projects or achievements you've had which really stand out and you can talk about?
Well, I'll use the two examples that you gave. I spent a lot of time in Egypt, a total of about 6 years. And some of the most important programs or projects that we had was building infrastructure to accommodate the many poor people in Egypt that did not have access to clean water and electricity. So among my private or most personal accomplishments would be the many water and sanitation facilities and energy facilities that we built in Egypt. In addition, we worked very closely with Egyptian non-governmental organizations that were involved in protecting human rights, and that was very important to us and very important to me. We also had a major education program where we worked with Egypt's Ministry of Education to help all Egyptian children learn how to read in standard Egyptian Arabic. Education continues to be a problem there, as it is in many other developing countries. In Iraq, I was in Iraq right after the war, and one of the main objectives that we were able to accomplish was to see that all children under the age of 5 were vaccinated against the most common childhood illnesses. And we also were able to reopen the schools that had been closed because of the war. And again, a lot of infrastructure work, energy, water, and sanitation. So those were among the achievements that I'm the most proud of.
Awesome. And you mentioned NGOs and the government. So do you do work with both, or is there a preference for, I guess, one or the other?
We work, in most countries, we work with both governments and NGOs. In many countries, governments don't have a full capacity to deliver services to their people, and many of the most important services are delivered by NGOs. To give you an example, when I was in Bangladesh, many of the health services, particularly to women, maternal and child health, they're delivered by non-governmental organizations. So we support those organizations and promote their ability to provide services for people. But we recognize that in the long run, many of the services that are provided to people, health, education, water and sanitation, they really must be delivered by the government. So in many countries, we work to strengthen the government's capability to deliver essential services to their people.
Awesome. So one question that a lot of students had asked was education pathways in pursuing a career in a similar field. Do you have any recommendations in your experience for students, such as specific majors or career paths for getting involved in this type of field?
Yes. I'm a bit of an anomaly because I'm a lawyer by trade. So I came into the diplomatic service as a lawyer and then went into management. But most people who are doing development work have what we call a technical expertise. They have a degree, usually an advanced degree, like a master's degree in public health, in education, in hydrology or engineering, in political reform, or something related to energy. So my advice would be to try to obtain a degree in a technical specification, because that's what most aid agencies are looking for people who have those technical skills. Here in South Africa, for example, our program is overwhelmingly in public health. So many of our staff have a master's in public health. Some actually have medical degrees. And so they work with the government and NGOs here to provide assistance in the COVID-19 response or HIV/AIDS response or tuberculosis response.
Great. And speaking of COVID, how has that impacted USAID's work, and what type of projects are ongoing to, I guess, address that? Because a lot of developed countries, it's hitting pretty hard because it's hard for them to get the healthcare services that they need in these countries.
Yes, here in South Africa is the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic across the continent. There are now almost 750,000 South Africans who have or have had the virus. Most of them have recovered. We're very fortunate that it has not overwhelmed the healthcare system. But what we at USAID have been doing is working with both the National Health Ministry and non-governmental organizations to provide the resources so that people can be treated. For example, we've provided 1,000 state-of-the-art ventilators to scores of public hospitals throughout the country. We provide assistance in helping public hospitals manage oxygen, because many sufferers of COVID-19 need oxygen. We have been involved in reaching out, particularly to the poorest communities, with public messaging about COVID-19, how they can prevent getting it, and how they can prevent spreading it. And I think you know what that means. It means washing your hands. It means wearing a mask. It means physical distancing. And the South African government has done a very good job of managing this pandemic, and they have really slowed it down. And I'm really glad that we've been able to work with them and help them to do that. So yes, this COVID-19 is big here in South Africa.
Great, and that's, it's really cool to hear the actual impact that you guys have been able to have by providing those ventilators. So I guess kind of transitioning to international development and foreign policy, which is obviously something you have so much experience in. What are some common misconceptions you might see when discussing topics like that?
Well, one common misconception, and it's a real problem back in the United States, is that people think either that we're giving money to dictators, or that the money is being wasted, or that there's a lot of fraud. And that's really not true. We do not give money to dictators, and the money that we spend, the controls are very tight. There are audits, there are accounting rules, there's an inspector general, which is sort of like the equivalent of a government investigation unit that tracks all of the money that we spend to make sure that it's spent for the purposes that it was intended. You know, it's very interesting. There have been surveys done in the United States. There are many Americans who think that our government spends 25% of the federal budget on foreign aid. In fact, it's about 1%. It's a very small number, and European countries, as a proportion of their budget, actually spend more. So that is a common misperception, is that we're wasting money or it's not being used appropriately.
All right, sounds good. And I guess going off of that, what are some of the main obstacles you might face when trying to manage programs in these developing regions? So, for example, promote literacy rates, to promote trade and investment, um, based on the country, for example.
Well, one of the most significant problems that we face, I'll use the education sector for an example. Many countries, many developing countries are struggling to create a comprehensive basic system of education. And it's not for a lack of money. Here in South Africa or in Egypt or Morocco, the government actually invests a lot of money in education. The problem is helping children to learn on the ground in schools how to read and write and do arithmetic. And part of the problem is that many countries don't have a modern curriculum for teaching reading, or they don't have teachers that are adequately trained, or as is the case here, and it was very similar to what I saw in Morocco, there's a language problem. Here in South Africa, for example, there are 11 official languages. And students, particularly outside of the cities, will begin to learn to read in their indigenous language. But as they get older, they need, of course, to learn English, because if you're going to go to university, you need to speak English. What happens is that children are not really being literate in any language. And if that's the case, by the time you're 7 or 8 or 10 years old, you start to fall behind in school. And the way things are today, if you don't speak one of the major languages, English or French or Spanish, it's going to be extremely difficult to go to university and to be able to get a job in the modern economy, much of which involves IT, computer skills, language skills. You know, it's very interesting. When I was in Morocco, the problem was that the children learn basic reading in Darija, which is a version of Arabic that is spoken nowhere else except in Morocco. But the problem is, if you want to go to university, you have to speak French. And if you want to go to university overseas, you need to speak English. So unless you are a multilingual student, if you're only learning in Darija, you're going to be increasingly disadvantaged, even in comparison to other Arabic-speaking countries. And this, again, is a major problem in the developing world.
For sure. And I think that's really, I didn't know that that was a language that was exclusive to Morocco. So that's really interesting to hear. All right. So my next question is, since you've been working in South Africa, this was your most recent country where you've been working. Are there any specific issues that you've mentioned a few, but are there any specific issues in the various sectors which USAID is specifically trying to target?
Well, yes, here in South Africa, one of the things we're trying to do is to promote trade and investment between South Africa and the United States, but also trade and investment between South Africa and its neighbors in Southern Africa. Here in Southern Africa, there's surprisingly little intra-regional trade. I believe that after North Africa, it has the lowest level of intra-regional trade in the world. And when you're not trading, it depresses economic growth. And when you have depressed economic growth, you're going to have a lot of unemployment. South Africa has the largest youth unemployment rate in the world. 50% of young South Africans under the age of 30 are unemployed. And the government here is very keen to help them get work. So what we're trying to do is to help generate economic growth so that these young people will be able to find jobs. The other sector where we're spending a lot of our money and time is in the public health sector. I mentioned COVID-19, HIV/AIDS. South Africa has the largest HIV/AIDS problem in the world. Over 7 million people have the virus. And then there's tuberculosis. South Africa is one of the worst afflicted countries for tuberculosis. So all of those health areas we work very closely with the government to bring those pandemics and epidemics under control.
Great. Sounds good. So you've answered all of the questions that we had. If anyone wants to ask any questions in the Q&A chat box, feel free to do so. We actually did great on time. Mr. Groarke, is there anything else in terms of, actually there's one question more I wanted to ask you. I guess right now, many teenagers may feel like it's very difficult to make an impact in the field of international development at a really young age, considering we're all in high school. What would you suggest, I guess, for such students who want to play a smaller scale role in their communities and contribute to helping these issues?
Well, sometimes the little things can make a difference. If you can touch the lives of individual people or families or villages, you may want to consider volunteering. One of my daughters has volunteered in the past to do development work. And one of the things that it does is it doesn't just give you an opportunity to help people, but it gives you an opportunity to learn and to grow. One of the things that I want to emphasize is no matter how much experience we have, no matter how old we are, we never stop learning. And if you want to do work or if you want a career in international development, you really need to expose yourself to what is a very diverse and very interesting work environment. You want to be able to work overseas, particularly in places that are poor and sometimes places that are not safe. You need to learn foreign languages. You need to have skills that you can bring that are actually useful to other people. You need to understand other cultures, other religions. For example, I believe I've spent a total of 19 years working in Muslim countries. So over the course of the 19 years, I learned a lot about Islam. And I'm sure I helped people in the countries that I worked in learn a lot about Christianity or the West. And all of this is very, very beneficial because the more you learn and the more skills you develop, the more useful you can be in the work that you're doing. My advice to young people more generally is you don't have to feel like it's up to you to save the world, no matter how old you are. But what you do need to do is to ask yourself, really, what is it that you want to do with your life? And you may find yourself when you're 50 or 60 years old, looking back and asking yourself, what did I accomplish that really made a difference? And my advice is that you really want to look back someday and to be able to say that you did something that was really meaningful, that you weren't just doing things for yourself, you were doing things for others as well. And it can bring you a great amount of personal satisfaction. So I'll leave you with that.
That was absolutely amazing advice. So we actually have 3 questions right now, so I will quickly ask you a few of those. So Hania Khan asked, does this organization send aid to countries with sanctions from the United States? If so, how do they do this?
Well, I'll give you a good example. Are you referring to countries against which the US has sanctions? Do we give aid to countries?
Yeah, I believe this is what she said.
Okay, let me give you an example. Here in Southern Africa, Zimbabwe. So Zimbabwe is a country against which the United States has sanctions against about 200 prominent Zimbabweans who are accused of human rights violations. Despite those sanctions, the United States has a very large assistance program in Zimbabwe, including for HIV/AIDS. So in other words, what we do is, if there are sanctions, we don't work with the government. We work directly with the people. So unlike here in South Africa, where we work directly with the government, we don't work with the government in Zimbabwe. What we do is we give the money to non-governmental organizations or others outside the government who provide assistance directly to underserved people.
Awesome. And the next question someone asked is, preserving local culture and traditions is a huge topic, and that the mindset many people in smaller communities can have. What can we do to open people to accept foreign aid and to actually be motivated to learn English or go to college?
Well, one of the really difficult things that we face is um, there's a lot that we know about how to improve people's lives. I remember, I'll give you a few examples. In South Asia, for example, one of the reasons there are so many gastrointestinal diseases in places like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, is because people don't wash their hands. It's just out of habit. So if you can just convince people to wash their hands, we know that that will prevent the spread of disease. So that's an issue where you've got to be careful to treat people respectfully, not to say, oh, geez, you've got to be washing your hands, but to instill in them basic hygiene practices, but to do it in a calm and respectful manner. The same thing with family planning. Some cultures and religions, they believe that having a lot of children is a good thing. Well, we know now that there are many problems. If women have too many children, it affects their health. It affects the health of their children. So if you have a family planning program, you need to accommodate what you know is scientifically and medically true to the culture. Countries like Pakistan or Egypt, where Islam is very strong, particularly conservative strains of Islam, we need to be very culturally sensitive. I'm happy to say, though, for example, in a place like Egypt, we had the cooperation of many Islamic religious leaders who understood that child spacing and women's health would save lives, would save the lives of women and children. And so they did the right thing and they supported family planning. But again, it has to be done in a very culturally sensitive way, because if we're creating the impression that we're going into a country and we're trying to tell people what to do, that's no good. Just because people are poor or they're different doesn't mean that they shouldn't be treated with respect.
For sure. And, as a Pakistani myself, with that background, I definitely agree with you. I think that's great that you guys were able to combat the cultural aspects, which can often obviously hurt women instead. The next question that we have is, someone asked that due to coronavirus, since everyone's currently locked in their homes, how can we, I guess, contribute to the USAID community on a virtual level?
Well, South Africa is gradually coming out of the lockdown. In fact, I'm here in my office speaking with you. What we've learned during the lockdown is that much of our work can be done virtually. For example, there's now a lot of virtual medical consultations. People can get referrals, whether it's HIV/AIDS or tuberculosis, they can get it virtually. And that has proven to be very helpful. We've learned that we can communicate with our government counterparts, with non-governmental organizations virtually. It's not the same as in person. There's no doubt about that. But South Africa and other countries are slowly opening up. And as they open up, we'll be able to go outside and hit the road again and to be able to do our work. But that question is a really good question, because it's been a challenge for us the last 6 months to be able to do our work. Just again, getting to the HIV/AIDS, if people don't get their medicine, they're going to die. So one of the things we needed to do is to make sure that people could still get their medicine, that there would be a place where they could pick it up. You can't do that virtually. They've got to pick up their medicine and take it every day.
Sure. And the last question that someone asked was, do you recommend, are there any specific internships and any fields that you think would help if you're planning to get involved in development slash public policy work? I guess internships in certain careers that you think would be helpful?
Well, there are many, many non-governmental organizations that are working on the ground. Um, some of them are indigenous, some of them are international, and I think many of them do have internships for young people. And I would urge you to seek them out, because if nothing else, it will give you an idea about whether it's for you. You know, it can be a very, very tough lifestyle. There are some people who really enjoy and believe in going into places where there's been a humanitarian disaster, or a place that's really poor. It may not be the greatest living conditions, and it would be good for you to find out if that's something that you can do. I remember going into Haiti a few years after the earthquake. That was a very, very difficult place to live. The capital city had been virtually destroyed. So I was living with my wife and one of my daughters in a house, but there was nothing to do. There was nowhere to go because so much of the country had been destroyed. So you've got to make up your mind, is that an environment that you want to live in? On the other hand, there are aid agencies that work in capitals. You have the United Nations, the World Bank, Geneva, Washington, and elsewhere. They may have internships as well, and I would urge you to explore them. Many of these organizations have websites. Go on the website, see if they have internships. If it's not on the website, get a name and write to somebody.
Awesome. And someone also going off of the career question, someone asked, in terms of undergraduate degrees, do you think there's something specific people should do, or should they use that time to, I guess, experiment? What's your take on undergraduate degrees?
Well, my take on an undergraduate degree is, unless you have a specific point that you want to reach, you've made your mind up. For example, you want to be a physician, you want to be an engineer, then of course you should follow the path that's necessary to get there. But the most important part of a university education is to first just get a broad understanding of multiple fields, whether it's literature, whether it's philosophy, economics, science, the natural sciences. But what's really important is to learn how to solve problems. Development, like so many other fields, the challenge is, how do you solve a problem? And that's one of the most important things that you get from an education. Critical thinking, ask questions, challenge convention, and then come up particularly with creative solutions. That is what makes you valuable in whatever field of study you decide to do. So to a certain extent, it's not so important what your university degree is in. What's important is the problem-solving skills that you've acquired. And then, if you really do want to go into development in a particular area, you can get a graduate degree in education, in health, in one of the sciences. And that's what many people, certainly what many Americans do. You know, one of the good things about being young, when people get to be my age, you know, you've been doing things a certain way for so many years, and you become set in your ways because you believe that this is the way to get things done. But young people are challenging conventional wisdom. They're thinking about new ways of solving problems. They're looking at problems differently. And that's a real advantage that you have. And it's an advantage that you can bring to any organization, is just an ability to see things differently. But it's not enough to see things differently. You need to be able to solve problems. And that's something that a university education can help you to do.
Great. Thank you so much. Before I guess we end the session, is there any place
Mm.
where USAID accepts public donations where students can possibly donate to the agency?
Well, are you talking about financial or volunteer work?
Both. I guess how students can get involved
Okay.
in any way if they'd like.
Well, what I would do is go on the website. There's a USAID website, and it is possible to um, donate funds either through the Washington headquarters or through individual missions. And we do get donations sometimes from private companies. If you want to donate your time or you want to volunteer, there are some aid missions overseas that do have internships or that do accept voluntary work. But I would urge that a better way to do it is maybe to find an NGO or a local organization that's working with USAID and volunteer for that organization, because we can be very bureaucratic. Uh, when it comes to these things, there's a lot of paperwork, and you probably don't want to do that. So it's easier to go to the non-governmental organizations, many of which I believe would be very happy to have your volunteerism.
Great, and I put the website in the chat, so if you guys want to look at that, you're completely free to go and look at the website. But that's pretty much it for today, Mr. Groarke. Thank you so much for your time. I myself, and I hope a lot of other people took a lot about USAID, and I'm really happy to learn a lot and see how the agency has impacted, I guess, so many regions around the world. But thank you so much for your time, and yeah, that's pretty much the end of our meeting. Thank you guys so much for coming and hope to see you guys next week.
Okay,
Thank you so
thank you. Good luck to all of you.